Okay, it all started in March 22nd of 1868 when Robert Millikan was born in Morrison, Illinois, and soon after that they moved to Iowa. They actually came to Maquoketa when Robert was 7 years old, and they settled here because his father, Silas Franklin Millikan, was the congregational minister here. He had accepted that position, and he served here from 1875 to 1888. And he was really an extremely well-educated man. He had gone to Oberlin College and Oberlin Theological Seminary. He was not only the longest-serving minister of that church, but one of the most influential. And as you know, that building still stands, that historic building on East Platte Street in Maquoketa, and it still continues to function today as the UCC Church. So, Silas Millikan, the arrow, there you go. Thank you. Silas Millikan and Mary Jane Andrews Millikan were Robert Millikan's parents. Millikan's mother, Mary Jane Andrews Millikan, also graduated from Oberlin College. She served as Dean of Women at Olivet College in Michigan. And so you can see that she certainly was not the small-town Iowa housewife of 1875. But many of the early citizens of Maquoketa were handpicked, as you know. If they came in and they looked like they were going to be good for the community, they were enticed to stay. And if not, J.E. Goodnow just hustled them on out of town. So we learned that Mrs. Millikan had a great deal to do with the success of her sons. She very carefully chose a home on West Platte Street. We don't have a picture of that home, but it still exists. It's been moved, and it's being lived in today. She felt that this home on West Platte Street, and it's where the Baptist Church is located today, she figured that that was perfect for her family. It had a huge, comfortable wraparound porch, a spacious living room and a kitchen, well suited for accommodating large church groups because she was the minister's wife. His mother chose carefully, but Robert later noted that that neighborhood on East Platte Street was where most of the 13 saloons in that day were located in Maquoketa. And so he was exposed to much of the rougher influences that were found in small Midwestern towns. But I liked him immediately because, he added, that he never thought it did him any lasting harm, and in fact, that's mine, I'm sorry. It contributed to his realistic understanding of life. Only a half-mile from the Maquoketa River, he swam daily, summers, with his two brothers. He was accompanied by their father and the neighborhood children, and they trudged through the meadow and the woods, and they dove from 8-foot-high banks. They played in the sand, and they rode the river on logs and shot the rapids through a break in the old dam after the flood. In the winter, they skated on the mill pond. They also converted an old barn on their property to a gym, and that became important in his later life. There, the boys would work out on a turning pole, on parallel bars that they built. They invested in boxing gloves and dumbbells. And Robert wrote, "I later earned most of my way through college acting as a student gymnasium director, a job which I got simply because I had acquired some competence and the necessary muscle in that old barn that was the rendezvous for all of the neighborhood boys. The physical conditioning served him well throughout his entire life." So there we see the Millikan family. In the middle you see Silas and Mary Jane, and they raised their 6 children. You see 7 there. There's an extra boy in there that we don't know who that is, but the boys were Alan, Robert, and Max, and the daughters were Grace, Marjorie, and Mabel. And this family of 8 lived on a preacher's salary of $1,300 per year. That's not very much, even back then. But when you consider the education that this family had, they could have been somewhere else earning a lot more. But Silas preferred to be in a small parsonage and to and to do his work in the church that way. The mother, Mary Jane, taught her children to supplement the family income. Each one had to keep a savings account, and they had to contribute to the church. And Robert referred to his mother as thrifty. She taught her sons to make her own way, to count on their father only for room and board. Remember, he's 7 years old. Hard work was expected, and Robert learned his work ethic at a very early age. He helped with the garden, he sawed wood, he mowed lawns, and he fished early in the morning for the evening's dinner. Then he went to school. They kept 2 cows, which Robert milked twice a day for 6 or 7 years. And as a teenager, he worked in the barrel factory here, $1 a day for a 10-hour day. After graduating from high school, Robert learned shorthand, and he became a court reporter at the Jackson County Courthouse, $6 a day. But he treasured that experience because he learned great respect for and understanding for our legal system. Some of the stories that he told when he reminisced about his childhood home was that of earning his first money. He had a house-to-house route selling eggs from his flock of motley chickens raised in a small pen in the family's backyard. He considered this his first field of experimentation. And he conducted many experiments as a youngster, one of which was proving to his college-educated father and leading men of the community that in the newly emerging sport of baseball, a curveball actually curved and was not, as they believed, an optical illusion. And this the young boy did by strategically placing 3 stakes and making it apparent that the ball passed on the opposite side of the medium stake and the other 2. So he proved his point to the older men of Maquoketa who thought that they knew better. This is the Academy building on Academy Hill. It's actually the 2nd building that was there because Maquoketa from the very early times put great stock in education and tried to see to it that the children of this community have the best education that they were. Next. This is algebra class, and it was Robert Millikan's favorite class. And he placed much of the credit for his achievements during his next 70 years upon the early training that he received in the schools of Maquoketa. Teachers leave a lasting impression on their students, and Millikan was no exception. The teacher, he said, would never forget, was a man by the name of Dan A., and I don't know how to pronounce his name, Perlatz? He was an excellent high school algebra teacher. He would send his class all to the board with a challenging problem to solve, saying that he would buy a quart of peanuts for the first one to get the right answer. And then he would lead the winner, followed by the rest of the class, out of the school and down to the peanut stand downtown. He would hand over a large bag of nuts and watch the boy pass the peanut around to everybody. In Millikan's words about this teacher, he was a man that knew his pupils' later success and happiness in life would depend upon how well they had learned the lessons of competition and sportsmanship. In other words, he wasn't those people that thought everybody should get a medal for participation. He believed in competition. He believed that you learned by competing and making yourself better. So this is Millikan's half of his 1885 graduating class from Maquoketa High School. They took the picture this year in 2 different ones, and this is what was the half that he was in. If Belle Tubbs was here, she would be so happy because Carrie Tubbs was part of that class. And he did very well in his class. He got great grades, as you can imagine, and he had a great time in high school. And we need to remember how wonderful Maquoketa High School has been through the years. Though Millikan graduated in 1885, in 1899, Matthew Luckish, who you see here, also graduated and became one of the world's outstanding scientists. He went to work for General Electric's Lighting Research Center, and he became known as the father of seeing for all of his work on light and vision. 14 years after Millikan graduated, Matlock's graduated. And they both returned several times to speak at graduation ceremonies through the years. The next man that was influential in Millikan's life was this man, William Boardman. And he saw Robert Millikan was an ambitious youth and that he had diligence and great brilliance. And so he wanted to help him out. And as one of Maquoketa's leading citizens and one of our most wealthy citizens, he's the man that paid for all of the stained glass windows in the Congregational Church back then. They're still there and so beautiful. And he's the benefactor of the Boardman Library that's half of our public library still downtown. So he left $1,000 in his will for Robert Millikan's further education. And of course, Millikan chose Oberlin College in Ohio because both of his parents had gone there. And it's interesting that as poor as they were, all 6 of the Millikan children graduated from that college. They all received a college education. While Millikan was there, Robert was there, he majored in mathematics and Greek, and he took the only class that was offered in physics, a 12-week class, and he said it was really, really poor. He was asked to teach there elementary physics the following year, and he accepted the position even though he knew nothing about the subject, because high schools in this country had not yet embraced science like the European countries had. So he needed the money, so he took the job, and he knew he had to learn quickly. He got everything he could brought home for this summer so that when he went back and began this position, he would be able to teach. So these are some of the, as he was doing this, he realized there are no textbooks in this country for physics, so he had to write the textbooks. And these are some of the textbooks that Millikan wrote. They're up here somewhere if you want to look at them. He graduated from there while teaching physics in 1891, and he stayed on at Oberlin to receive his master's degree in 1893. And I think it's important to remember that at this point he received virtually no direction in the study of physics. He learned it all himself. He taught himself. So after this, he was rewarded a fellowship at the University of Columbia University in New York, where he met Michael Pupin, who was one of the greatest physicists of the day, and he encouraged him to pursue scientific studies. Up until that time, he was going to be a gym teacher because he worked out and did so well in his barn, so he had other ideas. So he followed that advice, and he became the only graduate student they had in physics, earning his PhD in 1895 with minors in chemistry and electrical engineering. Then his professors, and he listened well, his professors encouraged him to travel to Europe, and he traveled all over Europe where so much scientific progress was being made. He spent over a year there attending seminars, studying, researching, and meeting many famous scientists. He also learned how to combine teaching with research and integrating graduate students into laboratory work. And it was interesting, he always talked about, while there, he made a 3,500-mile bicycle tour of Europe. And at the end, he found that toward the end, he only had 1 week to complete the last 700 miles. He pressed forward, and he was forever proud and talked about the feat because it showed his physical fitness. And he always said, thank goodness to that makeshift gym in Maquoketa, Iowa. So, then he returned to the United States in 1896, and he joined the University of Chicago, very prestigious college. He was a faculty assistant to Professor Michelson, and he was appointed assistant professor of physics at the University of Chicago. Well, at the University of Chicago, the Department of Physics was a new department, so it required not only teaching, but once again, he had to write the textbooks that were used for many years. Those textbooks were revised along the way, and over time they educated millions and millions of high school students and college physics students in this country. He organized the curriculum for the school. He supervised the design and the building of laboratory equipment. And his work days while he was there were 12 hours long. By 1910, he was named a full professor there, however, and that gave him time to spend on his own research projects because he had students that would help him with all of these things. So that is where he developed his oil drop experiment, which he is famous for, which you see here. And it measured the electrical charge carried by the electron. And this is what he received his Nobel Prize for in 1923. And I'm looking at Dan because he knows way more about this part of things than I do. The next photo, we see him with his wife, thank you, Greta Blanchard. So here he is working 12-hour days, busy, 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 but while he was there in 1902, he married Greta. They built a home near the university, and they raised 3 very accomplished sons, Clark, Glenn, and Max. They all achieved great success, as you might expect. I think that it was Clark that died early in life. He was mountain climbing, and there was a bad accident, and his life was taken. But Greta was a very understanding wife, and she knew that Robert was going to work long hours and was very dedicated to his research, and she helped him with that. She was okay with that. And it's funny because one of the stories that you read that he's told various times is the story of the day they got married. So he was supposed to be at the Blanchard home at 6 o'clock, but he was busy in his laboratory counting oil drops, and time got away from him and it got very late. And so all of a sudden it was time, he had just barely enough time to get to the house in time for his wedding, and when he went to leave, he found the doors were locked. So then he had to hunt, and he finally found a janitor who had a key, who let him out, and he rushed to the Blanchard home, and he got there barely in time for his own wedding. And this is a picture that came from Caltech, and it shows Robert with his father, and I think his uncle, and that would be his oldest son, Clark. So he found time for a family, and his children were all very, very successful. So along with his wife, he must have done a very good job. So this is something that is up here that we have in our collection that I'm really proud that we have. This is actually a page from Robert and Greta's passport, and it was found in a little gift shop or a little secondhand shop somewhere or something. And a professor by the name of Dr. Ron Powell had purchased it, and he had just kept it for a long time. And he came to Kokota for whatever reason and went through our museum and saw our display about Millikan and said that he was going to donate that to us, and he sent this page to us. So it's his passport, his picture with his signature and everything, and it's just kind of a nice thing, a fun thing for us to have. So because of all his travels in Europe, you know, when he was going around on his bicycle and he was doing all these seminars and he was meeting all of these very famous scientists, Millikan was appointed director of research at the National Research Council as the United States prepared to enter World War I. They knew that it was going to be absolutely imperative for us to gear up for this war. We were just a young country. We didn't have much ready. So he took a leave of absence from the university in 1917, and at that time he became chairman of the Anti-Submarine Committee. And because in World War I, the greatest menace was the sinking of ships by the German submarines that were so formidable, this is what his job was, to find a solution to that. So he brought together the very best minds in the military and in industry and in academia to solve this problem. He solved the problem quickly, but then the Navy didn't have the money to build the ships that he needed to use the detection equipment. Not to be deterred, Robert Millikan reached out to Henry Ford, and he got him so excited about the building of these boats that they wrote a proposal overnight. They walked it through the approval success. These were called Eagle boats, and the first prototype was ready in July, and others were under construction, when all of a sudden the war ended in November. So none of them really saw service. But Millikan was on it. He was capable. He was willing to put in the time to see that his country that he loved so much was defended. So the next picture that we have here is the Norman Bridge Laboratory of Physics in Pasadena, I believe. After 25 years of working at the University of Chicago, Millikan moved his family to California in 1921. He went to the Norman Bridge Laboratory of Physics, and this is where his interest in education started, and his research really began to blossom. Two noted scientists you see here with Millikan, astrophysicist George Hale and physical chemist Arthur Noyes, asked him to join them in developing a first-class, world-class research and teaching institution at Thorpe College of Technology in California. It was quickly renamed California Institute of Technology, or as we know it, Caltech. Robert Millikan became what was called the chairman of the executive committee. In other words, he was the college president, but he didn't want to be called that. So he was known as the chairman of the executive committee. But he is the person responsible for Caltech becoming the wonderful institution that it is, a world leader today. Part of this was because he had famous friends. He had friends like Madame Curie. You can see the side of her face there. She was the researcher that did so much in radiation, and because of her we have cancer cures and things, or treatments and things like that. Robert Millikan actually furnished her the, I don't know, it was radium, the material that she needed to do this, because in Europe she was not able to get it. So he got the material for her so that she could carry out her research and do this, and was greatly responsible for her receiving the Nobel Prize for that. And then you see here Einstein, and everyone knows Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein was a close friend of Millikan's. He actually attended Millikan's courses and was instructed by him. He was also very helpful. But Millikan's expertise in attracting outstanding faculty, getting the best and the brightest students, and funding, mostly private funds, quickly made Caltech a leading scientific institution. This was a time of wealthy entrepreneurs willing to invest large sums of money in the pursuit of scientific advancement. Millikan led Caltech from 1921 to 1945. And then he retired to become vice chairman of the board of trustees of Caltech, and he held that position up until the time of his death. After retiring, he continued with his research, and what a legacy he left. He worked on telescopes at the Mount Wilson Observatory. He was a big part of that. And on the 200-inch telescope at Mount Palomar in California. He began the Jet Propulsion Laboratory was at Caltech, that made our space program possible. And he discovered and named cosmic rays. And he did high voltage research. Whoops, there's a poster under this. There's a poster. He was called the billion-volt man for all his research in that. He just did so very much. Here we see something that just impresses me. How many of us have a stamp with our name and our picture on it? So this was Millikan's stamp, and the first day of issue envelope with which he was honored. And this first day of issue envelope was Eddie Ortel's, and Dr. Ortel, and he donated that to our museum. So that's up here too, if you want to look at it. He was on the New York Times well, probably not the front page, but he was on the New York Times full page for its book review, Millikan, Man of Science and of God. And one of his things was so many people thought there was a huge conflict or think there's a huge conflict between science and God. But he kind of regarded God as the master scientist and made it all just work together, and wrote a wonderful book about that. In 1923, whoops, sorry, not in 1923. In 1950, Robert Millikan published his autobiography. And 3 years later, he died in Pasadena. He died on December 19th, 1953, and that's exactly 70 years ago today. He was clearly one of the leading scientists of his time, and the work that he did has provided the basis for countless discoveries and research that even continues to this day. And many well-known scientists say that the world would not be the world it is today without the work that Robert Millikan did. So although he's well known throughout the world for his scientific and educational achievements, Millikan always credited the experiences that he had to the life lessons that he learned while he was growing up in Maquoketa, saying that it had a profound effect on how he lived his life and what he was able to achieve. He, of course, he worked at our courthouse, but he was always at the public library. And I'm just really glad we have 3 of these little books. The library back in the 40s had a study group, and they named it the Millikan Study Group after him. And we have 3 of the little booklets that they put out through the years. So there was that. And then in 1998, the Jackson County Historical Society, under Tony Crackey and Dr. Ortel, held a week-long celebration entitled Diamond Jubilee to honor him. And I looked at some of those pictures, and I saw a picture of people that were there at that occasion. I saw Kathy Bailey there. She was there. I don't know how many of the rest of you were there, Mona? Mona was there. It was I didn't live here then, but it must have been a very wonderful thing. But the scientists that you see here, this is an earlier picture. Dr. Ernst Stillinger, Dr. James Van Allen, Dr. William Pickering. This is back in the day when they used all of the work and the research findings that Robert Millikan had done to build, to build the rocket that they're holding above their heads. And this is the rocket that was used, or part of what was used. Dan knows more than I do. Part of what was used in our space program. These men had 3 satellites ready to put into space, and the United States government would not give them the go-ahead. They kept waiting and they kept waiting, and they couldn't understand why. I mean, we still don't know why, I don't think. All of a sudden, some of us remember when Sputniks were put into space by the Russians. They launched Sputniks. Well, then the government contacted these men and wanted to know how soon they could get our rockets up, or our satellites up there, even though they'd been ready for a very long time. So then our satellites were launched. But it all went back to research that Millikan did. And so those 3 men were invited by Dr. Ortel, who understood this all well, to come to Maquoketa and participate in the Diamond Jubilee. And they talked about 3 different things. One talked about his life. One talked about his work, but I just don't remember. I wasn't here, so I don't know what all they talked about. I do know that Dr. James Van Allen, whom we're all familiar with because he's from the University of Iowa, he was born and raised in Iowa, he discovered the Van Allen belt. Thank you, the belt that we all know that name. He talked that day about how similar his upbringing in Iowa was to Robert Millikan. He too was very, very poor, and he too raised chickens and sold eggs and worked very, very hard to get to where he was. So they had a lot of, though he had not met him, he was very familiar with all of his work, and they had a lot in common. So that was in 1998. Then in 2018, the Historical Society formed a committee to honor Millikan on his 150th birthday. And members of that were Dan Davidson and Rich Rockroar, Jim Vorlin, Jean Hosley, who visited not long ago. I hope some of you saw her. Carol Boyd and myself. We gave lots of programs, and we had exhibits in the Maquoketa Art Experience in different places. But a proud member of our team was Dr. Steve Feller. Dr. Feller is a professor of physics at Coe College and the head of Coe College Physics Department. He had been to the museum many times and saw our exhibits and our displays. And so he contacted us and he wanted to be part of this. And he involved his students. He was still teaching, and I think still is. He involved his students. They designed a t-shirt, they're up here, which they sold. Interesting t-shirt, I have to show you this. Only college students. Robert Millikan has a green face and blue hair. But their heart was in the right place. So they sold t-shirts, and with that they earned enough money that they could purchase an oil drop experiment kit. And that they donated to Maquoketa High School. He also came for 3 days with his students and with Rich Rockroar, Jim Vorlin, and Dan. They went to the high school. They talked to the whole science, all of the science classes at Maquoketa High School and maybe at Easton Valley. They taught them about Millikan, how great it was to have somebody, even though it was 1885, how awesome that somebody could be educated in Maquoketa and have all the accomplishments that this man had. And they taught each one of the students that participated to do the oil drop experiment, which was a great thing. And then they got to keep the oil drop test kit. So I think we have a picture of the oil drop test kit.
Nope.
Nope.
That's the last one.
Really? Strange things are happening to my computer today. I've tried 2. I don't know what it is. I'm jinxed, and I apologize. Anyway, he did great. He did great and awesome things, and I think that he needs to be remembered for some of those, for the awesome things that he did. Today in Maquoketa, as far as I know, besides our little exhibit that I brought most of over here, and we always have set up at the other building, the only thing left in Maquoketa today that honors Robert Millikan after all he did for us is the National Honor Society chapter at Maquoketa High School is named after Robert Millikan, which is a great thing, and I certainly compliment them on that. Tomorrow, so you know, they are having their induction ceremony. They will be inducting 25 new students into the Honor Society, and they will have a program about him. So I just like everybody here to know that Robert Millikan never forgot Maquoketa. No matter how famous he became, everywhere he went, whenever he had a chance, whenever he was asked, he talked about Maquoketa and how living here and growing up here made him into the man he was. And he came back to visit as often as he could, came back for graduation ceremonies and different things. He never forgot Maquoketa, and I think that we need to be doing more to remember Robert Millikan because he was certainly a great man. So, any comments, any questions, other than I'm sorry about all my technological problems?
Where was...
You know, I don't know. Do you know, Dan or Helen?
What was the question?
What did he die of? He was 85, right? He was 85. He probably just wore out. I mean, he worked 12-hour days, sometimes more, almost his entire life. So.
Where was James Van Allen born?
Oh, I didn't bring that with me. I know we know.
James Van Allen, Mount Pleasant.
Thank you.
Where?
Mount Pleasant, Iowa.
Oh.
Yep. And it's just awesome.
Huh?
It's just awesome, the respect that he has for Robert Millikan and the curiosity that he has about how they grew up together. Judy?
Wikipedia says he died of a heart attack.
Okay, there we go. He had a heart attack. So,
If that's correct, I mean, Wikipedia,
no, I'm sure you're probably right. I know he died in Pasadena, at his home in Pasadena. And so, the history, I hope, will remember him well. Well, we know history has remembered him well. Just McCoken is lagging a little bit behind. So, any other questions before we go? All right, thank you so much. Have a Happy New Year, everybody, and a Merry Christmas, of course, in between. But this will be the last brown bag lunch for,
This year?
yeah, for 2023. Maybe, thank goodness, after all of this. Sorry. But January will be a whole new year, so thank you so much for coming.